our brother John Schuchart just shared with us as he began to speak. The thought that disturbed him the most, Robert Kennedy said later, and that made the prospect of war much more fearful than it would otherwise have been, was the specter of the death of the children of this world and all the world, the young people who had no role, who had no say, who knew nothing even of the confrontation, but whose lives would be snuffed out like everyone else's. They would never have a chance to make a decision, to vote in an election, to run for office, to lead a revolution, to determine their own destinies. It was this, wrote Robert in notes published after his own assassination, that troubled him the most, that gave him such pain. This thought that troubled President Kennedy so much, that gave him such pain, was compassion, a compassion toward the children of this world who had no role in a nuclear war and would not survive it. It was a transforming moment in Kennedy's life. It was what Thomas Merton had envisioned when he wrote, "Maybe Kennedy will break through into that totality of self-forgetfulness and compassion someday by miracle. But such people are before long marked out for assassination." When JFK experienced that moment of turning, he made the most crucial decision of his presidency and of his life and of life. He decided that his brother Robert should meet secretly with Soviet Ambassador Anatoly Dobrynin. He did not tell the National Security Council. He told his brother to personally convey the president's great concern, as Robert put it. At a moment when the world was falling into darkness, Kennedy did what his generals, what his National Security Council thought was unforgivable. He not only rejected their pressures for attacking Cuba and the Soviet Union, even worse, the president reached out to the enemy for help. That could be considered treason. Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev saw it as hope. Robert Kennedy, when he met secretly with Soviet Ambassador Anatoly Dobrynin in Washington, he warned the Soviets that the president was losing control to his generals. He needed the Soviets' help. When Khrushchev received Kennedy's plea for help in Moscow, he turned to his foreign minister, Andrei Gromyko, and he said, "We have to let Kennedy know that we want to help him." Khrushchev hesitated when he heard himself say help. Just when the U.S. president seemed to be at his wit's end, did he, Khrushchev, really want to help his enemy? Yes, he did. He repeated the word help to his foreign minister. He said, "Yes, help. We now have a common cause to save the world from those pushing us toward war." How can we understand that moment? The two most heavily leaders in history, on the verge of total nuclear war, suddenly joined hands against those on both sides pressuring them to attack. Khrushchev ordered the immediate withdrawal of his missiles in return for Kennedy's public pledge never to invade Cuba and his secret promise to withdraw U.S. missiles from Turkey, as he would in fact do. The two Cold War enemies had turned so that each now had more in common with his opponent than either one had with his own generals. Neither John Kennedy nor Nikita Khrushchev was a saint. Each was deeply complicit in policies that had brought humankind to the brink of total nuclear war. Yet, when they encountered the void, they turned to each other for help. In doing so, they turned humanity toward the hope of a peaceful planet. Kennedy kept walking in that direction. On June 10, 1963, he gave his American University address in which he envisioned an end to the Cold War and said he was unilaterally stopping the U.S. testing of nuclear weapons in the atmosphere. In July 1963, Kennedy and Khrushchev agreed to the partial nuclear test ban treaty. In September, climaxing a grassroots campaign organized from the White House that turned U.S. public opinion around, the Senate passed the test ban treaty by a large margin. Also in September 1963, JFK initiated a secret dialogue with Fidel Castro to normalize U.S.-Cuban relations. Kennedy's first back-channel representative in that dialogue was meeting with Castro in Cuba at the very time JFK was assassinated. The U.S.-Cuban dialogue died in Dallas. On October 11, 1963, President Kennedy signed National Security Action Memorandum 263, ordering that U.S. troops be withdrawn from Vietnam, an order that President Johnson quietly voided. The Vietnam War was reignited in Dallas. President Kennedy's courageous turn from global war to a strategy of peace provides the why of his assassination. Because he turned toward peace with our enemies, the communists, he found himself at odds with his own national security state. Peacemaking had risen to the top of his agenda as president. That was not the kind of leadership the CIA, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the military-industrial complex wanted in the White House. Given the Cold War dogmas that gripped those dominant powers, and given Kennedy's turn toward peace, his assassination followed as a matter of course. It was a transparent act of state. Just as John Kennedy did, Barack Obama had a crisis early in his presidency, like the Bay of Pigs, actually, in John Kennedy's presidency. Obama became the target of a covert operation that trapped and compromised him as president. In Obama's case, the challenge to his authority as commander-in-chief came not from the CIA, as it did at the Bay of Pigs for Kennedy, but from the Army, and not in Cuba, but in Afghanistan. As in Kennedy's case, Obama's response to the entrapment established the pattern of his presidency, but in a direction opposite to Kennedy's. Our brother Obama has become an obedient servant to his national security state, and as a result, a source of despair to many of his supporters. The critical background to President Obama's June 2010 firing of General Stanley McChrystal for his outlandish Rolling Stone interview was McChrystal's close relationship to the man Obama named to replace him. The president's newly appointed Afghan commander, David H. Petraeus, was McChrystal's boss. He was his mentor. In its September 2009, in a more significant subversion of President Obama's authority than the later interview, General McChrystal had been Petraeus's point man in a Pentagon threat of revolt unless the president escalated the Afghan war.